possible by a generous donation from Adit Caperton and Annette Harrell-Caperton. I'm totally thrilled to present Heather Thorne, who is one of my heroes in the information and communication technology for development space. You know, here in academia, we can study, we can talk, we can critique, we can design pilots. Heather's the one that really goes out there and does it. Especially in her org is one of the only orgs that we really use as a case study of how to do things correctly. And this is, of course, in the context of an industry where even the World Bank, that likes to toot its own horn, says they have about an 80% failure rate in ICT for development. So thank goodness we have folks like Grameen Foundation's AppLab and Heather in the space. She always gets embarrassed when I say this, but she beat me out of a job alongside her. So she's even better equipped to talk about this than I am. Also wanted to recognize that we have our associate director and our director here, and a few of our board members. Thank you for coming very much. And why don't you take it away? If you need anything, let us know. We will end in about 40 minutes so that Heather can take your questions and comments. Thank you very much.
Well, it's fantastic to be here. I see a lot of familiar faces from earlier today. For those of you who've seen parts of this before, I apologize in advance for anything that is a repeat. But hopefully this will be a little bit of a longer and more in-depth conversation and give lots of opportunities to ask questions. So, and then just one other thing I should say as a caveat. It's wonderful to hear that the Grameen Foundation is doing things right, but I think we're all in this space learning together. I think there are a lot of things that we have yet having a really well thought out and being very honest with ourselves is a really important thing that we have to do as well as our publishers. So I don't want to take credit for having all the answers. So what I'd like to share with you today. What I'd like to share with you today is basically a little bit of an in-depth look into a program that I've been leading for the last 2 years in Uganda. It's in the agriculture sector, and provide a little bit of context around that program as sort of a case study. But then also just kind of take a step back at the end and really take, provide what I see as some really important trends in development, especially ICT for development. Keeping in mind that I've used this caveat in the past in discussions today, I'm coming from a practitioner angle where I actually came into ICT for development from the private sector. I do not have an academic background studying this field, and so there are a lot of things that other people are talking about or analyzing or theories or perspectives that I just am frankly not even aware of. And so in some ways that's nice to have that fresh perspective, but in other ways I realize that I'm missing out. And so I would love to hear people's questions, comments, criticisms at the end, because I think those are the things that will be important for me learning as we carry this forward. So, all right. So just a little context. A lot of people are very confused about who is Grameen Foundation, Grameen Bank, what do you guys do? Are you a private foundation? So I just want to give a little bit of context. Grameen Bank was started, actually it was originally a research project in the 70s, started by Dr. Mohammed Yunus, who was an economist in Bangladesh. And after a number of years, there were a number of early indicators that this model was really taking off, this village banking model. So an independent Grameen Bank was formed in 1983. And there are a number of other Grameen entities that share a common sort of history and a set of values around poverty alleviation, each kind of focusing on different aspects. Most of them do their work all in Bangladesh, but they're all independent entities. Now, Grameen Foundation was actually formed in 1977. Our CEO and founder was a Fulbright scholar working under Dr. Yunus, received a $6,000 grant to go and start Grameen Foundation as a nonprofit. And really the goal was to go and take a lot of the sort of philosophies, learnings, models that had worked in Bangladesh and say, what would it take to see if we could apply this in, someplace in Africa or Southeast Asia or some other part of the world. And so our original focus was heavily on microfinance and kind of extending the reach of microfinance through MFIs. Then, about 10 years ago, there was a recognition that technology really had a role to play in poverty alleviation. Really sort of focused in two areas. First, looking at the village phone model of women who rented out a telephone in a rural setting where there was no phone access. She was able to sort of start a small business by taking out a microfinance loan and then renting the phone to her community members. And at the time, it was just voice services, really basic Nokia phones, maybe SMS. But really kind of seeing what would it take if you looked at the model of Bangladesh and what made it work there. It's a very dense population. The telco is owned by the government. There are a lot of factors, macro factors, micro factors, that made it work there. Could you take it to Rwanda? Could you take it to Indonesia? Could you make it work in those countries? interventions, and what would be different, what would be the same. So at first, we were really focused on kind of taking the village phone model and replicating that around the world. We generally did that through joint ventures with telecom operators, where they would see this as part of their corporate social responsibility investment, and we would come together, work with them to sort of get this off the ground, and then over time, if they saw it as something that they could run as a viable line of business, then they would basically buy out our share. And so now there are functioning village phone businesses in Uganda, Rwanda, Cameroon, and then a number of other countries where people have started this work on their own and will carry it forward. The other area was looking at technology as it could be used to further microfinance, so help MFIs, especially pro-poor focused MFIs, run their businesses more efficiently, track who they were reaching through social performance management plans. That was 10 years ago. We've come a long ways in that time, recognizing that microfinance in itself as an industry has its place in development, but there are many, many, many more needs that are not able to be addressed just through microfinance as the industry exists. And so increasingly, we're doing more sort of direct interventions where we are building solutions together with other partners, strongly leveraging mobile phone and technology. So that I give you that extended view because I think that'll give some context for where we are today in the program we're going to talk about. So, okay. Quick, another framework slide. This is kind of what we do today. We focus in what we see as three most likely to be able to have impact or in some way influence kind of in a positive way the lives of the poorest people in the world. Looking at finance in terms of financial products and services. Agriculture, because the majority of the world's poor are in rural areas and engaged in agriculture. Women are disproportionately affected in the agricultural sector. And obviously health. So those are kind of our three areas of focus. Mobile phones are a theme where we're utilizing technology throughout these interventions where it makes sense. But starting with kind of the solution first and then saying can technology or mobile technology be used to either extend the reach of those interventions, help run the program more efficiently, collect data, etc. That's more about that. Focus definitely on trying to reach the poorest. Often development interventions go out with an intent to reach the poor, but if there's not good mechanisms in place to measure who you're reaching, you don't always know if what you've developed is a solution that actually reaches the people who are in most need of that intervention. So we really try to have a focus on that, largely through social performance management. And then these are the types of solutions that we focus on delivering. So, okay, here's the case study I wanted to share. This is the problem we're trying to solve. Basically, Ugandan smallholder farmers, they're not food secure. Many of them are eating 2 meals a day. They don't have enough food to be healthy. They don't have enough variety of food to be healthy. And there's also, as many of you know, population statistics say that, and a lot of the studies say that we're going to have to increase the world's agricultural productivity by approximately 70% by 2050 to feed the world. I mentioned this in the last class. There's a lot of debate about how, to do that. Obviously, there are very strong opinions around GMO and biotech and all that. But that aside, I think just if population growth continues as it does, smallholder farmers are going to play a very, very important role in feeding the world. If they have a hard time feeding themselves today, obviously there's a long ways to go before they can grow enough to export, well, to sell and then export. And then there are just a number of challenges in the existing services that are available to farmers. For people who grew up in a rural or agricultural area of the United States, you probably know that agriculture extension is not something new. We've been doing it in the United States for a very, very long time, and it's basically just information and services that are provided to farmers to help them understand how to achieve higher crop yields or to address a certain disease or take care of their animals. Those types of services, there's billions of dollars being poured into agriculture extension work around the world, whether it be to governments or NGOs. But a lot of those services just aren't effectively reaching farmers. Either it's because they're understaffed and they can't get out far enough to the farmer that's at the end of the dirt road across the washed out bridge, or maybe the incentives aren't there, maybe the content's not relevant, it's not localized. For various reasons, the poorest farmers who need this information the most aren't getting it. So this was really the problem we were trying to solve, was how could we create some sort of a solution, an intervention, that could really help make existing agriculture extension efforts more effective in reaching more poorer farmers in a way that we could actually improve their yields and improve their food security. That was really our goal. So I wanted to sort of start by giving some context around, where we were working. This is a photo I took last April when I was out visiting one of the community knowledge workers that I'll tell you more about in a minute. This is down a dirt road in the Gulu area, the Choli region in the north of Uganda. This is basically an area that for the last 20 years has been suffering from, basically being terrorized by Joseph Kony and World War II's army. And these people are just coming back from these security camps, these IDP camps, just starting to get back on their feet again. So we're way out, very, very long distances from the largest town. Food security, that's the first issue we encounter. The thing I was talking about in the last class is, for various reasons, a lot of people grow the same crops. In this case, with mangoes, they grow naturally there. These are not the kinds of mangoes that you and I would ever buy at the market. They're stringy, they're sour, they're not very good. But, they grow naturally. Everybody's growing mangoes, and they ripen at the same time. So if you're a very poor smallholder farmer living in a village where you don't have access to transportation, you're extremely poor, you're trying to sell this to earn enough money so that you can go buy some better seeds or some seeds at all to replace what got wiped out by your last drought. How are you going to sell these? So I think the first question is just food security, and the context is much more difficult than it first sort of seems when you start to see what's available. Next is just that these people are very vulnerable. They've been through a lot. They very much want to learn. They very much want to pick themselves up, but there's very little safety net. There's very high risk aversion for a good reason. People, if they make the wrong decision about what to plant or the timing of when they plant, and the rains come late or they come heavily and they wipe out their crop, they don't have a parent they can go ask for money. They don't have a credit card. They don't have, welfare. They don't have any social net. Like, there's nothing. And so it's all about survival. And so for these folks, it's really how do you help them make that the very, very simplest little steps to just have a slightly healthier crop, slightly better yield, slightly better decision about whether to grow this versus that. Can you facilitate that so that people can start to take a step forward? So after we spent, in the early days of this work, we spent 9 months on the ground in Uganda back in 2009, 8 and 9, doing a 9-month test of concept where we had some ideas based on some early research. We wanted to go test them further. Basically, we did a ton of ethnographic research to say, what information do farmers really need? How are they getting this information today? What are the barriers to getting that information? Who gets it? Who doesn't get it? We really tried to hone in on sort of what are the information flows that are there, that should be there, that smallholder farmers need. So based on that early research and kind of understanding of what farmers really needed, we started to think about what could be some means by which you could provide that information. And I should give some context. We had actually done some early work in Uganda, partnering with MTN, partnering with Google, looking at doing basically like an SMS-based search system for content. Tips on agriculture, tips on health, sexual and reproductive health. We worked with some content experts. Put them, in this SMS-based system. We advertised it. People could text into a short code that was free, and they could get menus of possible responses. And what we found is that initially there was great usage and great feedback. People really liked it. But at the end of the day, if you didn't have an ongoing commitment from Google or MTN or some other party to pay for the ongoing updates to the content, fixing the bugs, marketing it, not only did people stop using it because the content wasn't relevant or wasn't fresh, but they just forgot about it. And so we kind of came away from that work saying, putting the information out there, because it could be out there, but then, then what? And so we had to start thinking about, what's it actually going to take? If you're trying to change people's behavior, and you're trying to really ingrain yourself into their life and be part of their everyday decision making, what do you need? And so we kind of went back to our early work with Village Phone, and we said, one of the things about that Village Phone lady in that village is that she's trusted, she's known, everybody comes to her to rent access to that phone. So could that model actually be used as a means of not only people being willing to sort of come and talk to a person because they're known and trusted, but that person could go out to each and every farmer and remind them, hey, I have this information. It looks like your banana trees are diseased, or it looks like you're having a problem with your beans. I think I've got an answer here. So could we utilize that Village Phone operator model, but in a sort of a whole new way? And how would we make that sustainable? We don't really believe that we can ask farmers to pay for this. And if we don't ask farmers to pay for this, then what? So that was kind of our early thinking. And so, we tested that in 2 districts in Uganda in 2009. And in particular, we were partnering with an organization called International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, who was looking at and tracking a banana disease called banana bacterial wilt disease that was just decimating the banana crop. And what turned out is that they wanted to understand, what do farmers actually know about this disease? What are they doing about it? And can we sort of use this community knowledge worker network idea to disseminate very practical tips to farmers about how to stop the spread and how to treat this? And so we tested this with 40 community knowledge workers. And basically what we found is that the majority of farmers had heard something about this disease, but they had no idea what to do about it. And it turned out it was very simple. All you had to do was cut off the diseased bud of the male plant with your machete, but you had to make sure that you burned your machete, stuck it in a fire afterward to kill the disease. Because if you didn't, you go around and start clearing stuff from your healthy crops and you're spreading the disease. So just through that simple sort of tool, we were able to not only know, we used GPS to track where the disease had gone, we also could know what the existing information was, and then we could actually go back and say, after this information is disseminated, what's the result after X months? So we started to say, gosh, we think there's something there. And so we wrote a proposal and worked together with the Gates Foundation to kind of think through what that could look like. And basically we're funded to build out a nationwide program built around this concept. So, oh, I forgot this slide. I actually like this slide because it's just sort of conveying that at the end of the day, for farmers, it's about making decisions. And I'm kind of joking, it's sort of a silly little game, but I sat down and played it once. It's like Settlers or, Oregon Trail. It just sort of drove home to me this idea that, if you can actually help a person get the information they need and make a better decision, you really can sort of, influence their life. And this just, it hit me because I thought I'd been making all these good decisions, and at the end of the day, when my crop was wiped out, the game was over, and I had no recourse. And so I started thinking, how do I help a farmer make the right decisions and, have some sort of safety net, create some sort of safety net. Sorry, diversion. So, but back to this question of sort of designing the intervention, I said, but if we started from the perspective of technology, how do we build a mobile phone solution? It's like going into a company that's going bankrupt and saying, gosh, let's install a new computer system and see if we can save it. At the end of the day, you go in, if you're sort of a turnaround consultant, you're going to go in and say, okay, I need to look at the products that are being offered, I need to look at the pricing, I need to look at the competition, I need to look at HR, operations, every aspect of that business, and say, how do I design solutions that take into account all those problems and needs? Same thing here. We needed to go in and understand every aspect of not only the information flows, but also sort of the incentives, the existing extension services, how people made decisions. So we really had to kind of do a deep, holistic understanding of all those pieces before we could really land on kind of what our model would look like. So, as I mentioned, so we did some of this in the early stage of the pilot, and then we did more of this in the big rollout. We have an innovation process that we use. This is kind of a generalized version of it. But, a lot of upfront ethnography, a lot of, thinking through the theory of change, logical framework, for impact, and, putting in place at least some hypotheses and some goalposts and some project plans that we could then start to build out against. This was going to be a big operation, a nationwide operation in Uganda, and what we didn't know is we were going to have to, build a team of over 40 people, which is where we are now. And 38 of them are Ugandan, so it's local. But building that whole piece up was not a simple thing. And so I think one of the takeaways, for me is in this field of ICT for development, there's sort of apps and technology, and then there's sort of solutions, and those two can work together. But you really need to have a very deep understanding of what's the problem you're trying to solve, and what is actually going to be applicable. In this case, it was much more than an app. It was, before we'd done that little farmer search app, and that was great, but it didn't really achieve the goal that we were trying to achieve. We wanted to create lasting behavior change at a, a scaled level. To do that, we really needed to build a whole solution. So, like I said, we kind of went back and looked at this model we had with Village Phone, where we said, okay, so we've got some sort of resources or capabilities or skills that we bring to the table. We work very closely with partner organizations that have farmer networks that are already reaching out and trying to, influence or touch these people in some way. Then, using this model of village-based intermediaries or entrepreneurs, can you extend that reach kind of one step further to actually get out to the people at the last mile? The phone is a tool that helps facilitate that reach and facilitate the operations, but at the end of the day, it's really about the people. So people say kind of, what's the crux of your CKW model? And I say, well, it's really the CKWs. The phone is just a tool, but all the pieces have to work together. So the model that we created, as I've sort of been hinting at, is this community knowledge worker model. It's the network, the last mile network of these human intermediaries. There's a shared technology platform, and that includes the handset-based apps that provide abilities on information dissemination, data collection, also field force management, so means of communicating with a field force and sort of saying, okay, here's your weekly target. Here's how you're performing against your target this week. Here's how much you need to go in order to achieve this level. Oh, here's your payment using mobile money. So kind of those types of tools. And then there's back-end tools around content management. We've got a cloud-based, like a Salesforce.com-based monitoring and evaluation dashboard and sets and other sources. And then I can basically take a look at my dashboard from anywhere. And we can do that for partners as well so that they can track their progress. So shared technology platform. Deep partnerships with content providers, and those might be other NGOs, they might be government agricultural research organizations, basically anybody who's got content that's been developed on different crops, different livestock, different things that farmers need. And we've put together basically an expert review board and a review process with some on-staff agricultural experts as well to basically say, okay, how do we take this really scientific stuff that's unintelligible for most of us, much less a farmer who's very literate, and how do we actually put that into sort of bite-sized, tips and bits that are actually relevant at a local level for farmers, primarily using materials or things that they can easily get. They're already growing or whatever, so organic tips. So it's content, and then the real-time feedback loop. So that's having this data collection capability that not only is a part of an offering we provide to partners, it's a way that we manage our own work and gives us early indicators of if something's not going the way we think it should be going, we can then dig in and send a person out. If a CKW is having a hard time and they're not performing, why is that? So maybe the first step is that a field officer calls them. And if the CKW doesn't really give a response or doesn't answer or we don't know the issue, then the field officer goes and visits them. So it's sort of a way to kind of, when you start to scale out a large network, it's easier to monitor it using the technology first, and then you can invest the people time to go out and really dig in further. So that's kind of the 4 elements of the model. It's layered over existing agriculture extension programs, so we do it in deep partnership with these other programs. An example I gave earlier is East African Dairy. It's a group within Heifer International. They're working with very poor dairy farmers in the West. And one of the things that they were struggling with is that they just didn't have enough field officers or trainers or people to go out and meet with all their different farmers on a regular enough basis to get the information out there, reinforce it, and check on problems. And so we said, well, let's work together. We could cost share. You guys pay part of the cost, we'll pay part of the cost of deploying another 100 CKWs in the community around where you guys are working. You'll be able to take your content and put it into our database, so make sure we've got it all in there along with all the other content. We can also design some custom surveys for you that are part of your M&E process, and then we'll put a dashboard together for you as well, and then we'll deploy this together. And so you guys are hopefully going to be able to better achieve your goals, and then we together are also going to be able to reach more farmers and provide that individual content. So that's an example of how we would work with a partner. And they would pay us a fee for service, and that fee for service is going toward our sustainability model. So we started with grant funding, and then over time, as these partners come in together, they each are paying for the access to the shared network. Right now, everything is free to farmers. Like I said, I don't think we believe that farmers are able to pay or willing to pay for information that they don't know how to value, just like we don't pay for Google. So, I think at this point, the hypothesis is we stick with in terms of covering the cost of it over time. So, I want to give just sort of a quick snapshot into one of the women that is a beneficiary of the program. Her name is Caroline. The current agriculture extension station that she would otherwise have access to is a 2-hour walk away. And if you're, minding your 5 or 6 kids, which is average family size in Uganda, you're going to walk those, however many 2 hours to visit my ag extension worker because I think he has some information I might need. And so, she's very poor. She has about 3 acres to take care of. I don't remember if assuming she's married, but I don't know that for sure. But she's living in the West, and she has this neighbor, Tabitha. Tabitha is a community knowledge worker who was recruited from within her community. So the way that we recruit these CKWs is we work together with a partner in that region and identify the farmer groups that have, kind of presence on the ground. And we say, this is the program, this is what we'd like to do. We go out and we sensitize the local village officials and ag extension people and government people, and then we get their permission to go in and seek candidates, submissions of candidates for the CKW role. People vote within their community on who they want to be their CKW, and they're told that this person will be performing this service. They will be paid if they perform it well, but that their goal is really to serve their community. And so once Tabitha had been nominated and elected and gone through all of her training and everything, she her job is to go around then and sign up farmers into the program. So she goes and visits Caroline and is like, hey, here, I've got this phone and I can find this information, and what's going on? How are your crops? How are your animals? And she finds out that Caroline is having problems with chickens. So a large number of them are getting sick or dying. These are her primary source of livelihood. And so they're able to look up and find out that there's a common sort of ailment that hits chickens, and that actually if you give them aloe vera, they will recover from it. And it's interesting because it seems weird. So I did a little Google search and aloe vera for chickens. So the recommendations, we try to make sure that things coming in from the different research orgs are actually, like I said, not only relevant locally, but things that farmers actually could go and do on their own. I've seen things like, mix 2 parts ash with 1 part cow urine, let ferment, and sprinkle on plant leaves. And that's a way to deal with some sort of a pest. So not all of them are organic like that, but we try to have a large number of tips that are like that, because obviously that's the most relevant for a farmer. So long story short, Caroline adopts these recommendations, and her chickens are healthy. So we have a lot of these anecdotal stories. Obviously, getting to a point where you can measure the long-term impact of these things is really difficult. That's another piece we'll talk about in a minute. And so just to give a sense for why we think this has potential, the yellow pin in the middle there is an actual location of the actual Ag Extension office in this particular district in the east of Uganda. And the pink and, well, they're supposed to be pink and blue, are the male and female CKWs in their actual location. And so really, as you can see, the goal is to blanket the area and make it such that farmers don't have to go 2 hours by foot in order to get the information they need. And because there's an incentive for the CKW to go and sign up these farmers and to go visit them over and over again, and over time to be able to show improvements, our belief is that they will be able to have that kind of behavior change that we're looking for and help farmers make better decisions or have access to markets or pricing, weather, et cetera, that they need. So, it's really, first of all, just about density and coverage and reach. And then, it's really also based on kind of where, what's the topography like? Is it really mountainous? Is it hard for people to travel very far? What's the existing sort of coverage of services? And also where our partner program is located. Obviously, we need our partners to roll out, and so where there's a partner intervention and a partner project, then we can roll out there. Over time, our goal is really to integrate with the Government Agriculture Extension Service and make sure that we can kind of get nationwide coverage. And so we've done 1 pilot with them, really trying to kind of get broader integration into their system. But they've just kind of shuffled the deck, and the leader of the entire ministry has just been put aside. So we're going to have to start building relationships from scratch. Which is always one of those things that you run into with these introductions. So, like I said, they provide information without going. This one is a little bit technical, but they're meant to be as sort of straightforward and easy to understand as possible. CKWs, by the way, have to be literate to qualify, and they have to speak some basic level of English, or at least be able to read it. And then they also have to speak the local village language, which obviously, since they're recruited from their own village, they speak it. I think if this program and this model is adopted beyond, Uganda, we're looking at Ghana right now, but if it were to go to, say, Ethiopia, it's not going to be easy for us to find English speakers who also speak local language, and so we're going to have to think about what's the, not only, the content you can manage, you could do local recordings or content, but, can you build your entire operation in the local language and yet still have it run out of a U.S. NGO? Like, am I able to effectively review the content or the processes or whatever if everything is in the local language? So those are some interesting things. Like right now, it's easy because we can have English be the primary operating language, but it'll get harder as we start to look at other markets. 35 crops, 6 livestock, weather, et cetera, et cetera. One interesting thing on market prices, there are a lot of people doing market prices, but what we discovered, we were going to outsource that and just pay a fee to license the content with somebody else. It wasn't localized enough to matter for us, for our farmers. They wanted prices at the next village in all directions. They didn't want prices at the town an hour away by car. And you can understand why. They have very, very little, if any, disposable income. And if they're going to spend the money to take their crops to market, they want to know which market to take them to. So we started using our CKWs to collect market prices and put those back into our database. And by the way, you could start, building out locations for mobile money agents or seed suppliers or any number of services. And over time, you could start thinking about, if you've got these, if people are signed up on mobile money, could they start to sign up for financial services through their phone? Could they start to sign up for these other things through the phone, even if they don't own their own? So I think there's a lot of debate about whether or not smartphones have a role to play in the developing world, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. I would say, assuming that the end user, the poor farmer, is going to have access to their own smartphone is probably unlikely anytime soon. But in a model like this, where a CKW pays $5 into a program nominated by their community, and over 2 years performs a service and pays back the cost of that phone, and then they own it, it's a business, it's a productive asset for them. And in that context, a smartphone makes sense because they're able, the location aspect of that data is so valuable. The fact that we can do photo diagnostic trees. Soon we'll hopefully be able to do some video working with Ricky and the folks at Digital Green to kind of learn their process. So I think there really is a role to play for smartphones, but it's the question of appropriateness for the model of the intervention. So in our case, I think it matters, but we're doing other programs working with midwives in Ghana where it's existing phones people already have. So we're developing very, very simple SMS-based and voice-based solutions. So it really has to kind of depend on the model. Talked about data collection. Data comes in through the surveys, it goes into the dashboard. I can log in anytime and check at least the high-level set of metrics: how many farmers have been registered, how many of them are women, what percentage are women, percentage that are under a certain poverty line, etc. And I think that data is not only important for us, but it's important for our partners. If you think about how long it takes to get the results of an impact study back, you can't really make any operational decisions in real time if you don't have data now. And so one of the things I was talking about earlier is that we've got a data analytics expert going through some of our, now 18 months worth of data and doing some analysis and correlations and looking for patterns and things that might help us understand how better to recruit or train our CKWs, or what determines better performance, or are they disproportionately signing up farmers that live within a small radius of their home? That's logical, but what would we need to do to get them out there further? So really starting to dig into that data and say, it's not the same as an impact study, but what can it teach us in the short term about operational performance so that we can make constant changes to the model? So I think that in partnership with having not only a local team in Uganda that's doing all the work, but actually recruiting all of our field officers from the local region that we're working in. So every field officer, who works in Gulu speaks Acholi or lives, is from that region. And so really having kind of this approach where everything is as local as possible, and then having feedback loops and processes and systems that pull all the pieces together in some sort of rational way. That's kind of the vision anyway. I don't always execute perfectly against that, but that's kind of what we're striving for. So just at a high level, it's a value proposition to the CKW themselves. It's not only do they get paid for providing services, but they can resell airtime, they can charge phones using the solar charger that is part of the business inbox. Over time, as there are new products that we're able to develop, whether they be financial products or things like that, the CKWs could potentially provide those to the people in the community for a very small fee. And then to the partners, I mentioned that we have this certain value proposition that we offer to partners. And so it's really, in some ways, a business-to-business pricing model, because we really think that offers the best potential for sustainability long-term. As you can see, we're, depends on the month, but hovering between 15, 20, 30% sustainable. And that's just based on oftentimes how much can these partner organizations actually pay toward one of these rollouts, given that their budgets are all allocated in advance. And they only have so much discretionary budget that they can work with to go do something new. Even if it might help them better achieve their goals or have more impact, they don't always have the ability to do it. So we have to go to them and say, okay, can we do a pilot together? And we prove this concept within your operation? And then let's try to put in place a plan for, budgeting longer term to do this in a sustainable way. So that is the offering to our partners. Here's some early results. 689 CKWs, although I know there's another 50 or so that have been training this week. Over 45,000 farmers registered, 29% female. One of the challenges we found is that we want to track all the farmers that we reach, but in a lot of households, only the male head of household registers. So we think we're actually reaching the females, the older children who are also farming, but we don't actually have a record of that. So right now they all get a little a card that has a unique ID on it. And we're trying to think about, could we come up with a better way, short of biometrics, could you come up with a better way with farmers who are illiterate, they don't necessarily know their birthday, you can't do random number generator like that. Is there something that's a combination of the first letter of their first name, their location, and something else, where you could have that, unique ID, and then it'd be much easier to track every interaction with every farmer and know who you're reaching and all that. Lots of interactions, lots of villages. And the good thing is the scale part of the equation we're succeeding against. I think what's hard is we're doing some adoption surveys right now. Adoption in the field of agriculture anyway, or ICT for ag, is seen as one of the proxies for impact because it shows not only an ability to change behaviors, but it can lead to longer term sustained improvements in yields or incomes or whatever. The hard part is, it's, we talked about this a lot earlier. It's very costly to do a lot of this stuff and to validate it. So it's easy to collect the data. We're collecting it using these mobile phone-based surveys. Then we go out and we re-administer 10% of these surveys with independent third-party validators. And they have to actually, try to see examples of if a farmer says they've adopted a certain agricultural practice, take a picture of it. But what if it's just the farmer saying, well, you told me, CKW told me not to plant until X date and I waited and he was right. How do you measure that? How do you validate it? How do you measure it? How do you know? I mean, the person can say, yeah, my neighbor here planted early and his seeds got washed out or his seeds dried up or whatever. I waited and mine did. But that's where you start getting into this stuff is really, really, really hard to measure. As many proxies for impact and sort of operational indicators as possible to kind of track all the things that would lead you toward impact, recognizing that at some point you're hopefully going to be able to measure some of this, but you might not. So measure as much as you can without making your program, come to a grinding halt. And that's where technology does play an important role. It really can help you kind of do a lot of that measurement more efficiently. Here's just examples of some of the things that farmers responding to the adoption survey have said that they're using the information for. I timed my garden activities based on the weather information. That's a big thing with climate change. Farmers are used to planting at a certain time and they prepare the ground. It's all done by hand. Hardly any tools. Prepare the ground, and then they plant and they hope that it rains at a certain time or within a certain time. And so that's critical. And so having localized weather forecasts is really, really important. Asked for a better price for my produce in the market. I went to a better market, meaning I chose which market to go to because the price was better. I used the knowledge to care for my livestock. So those are the types of things they're using it for. But again, getting back to validation, it's hard to validate some of these things. And first of all, whether or not the person did it, and second of all, what the impact of that was. So, just lastly, so CKWs. I think really one of the things that I observed when I stayed and spent a weekend out with the CKW, this is Simon Boya, at the end of that long dirt road I showed earlier. The thing that was so overwhelming for me, I woke up on the second day and I'm like, the biggest learning for me is that for most of these folks, every single day is Groundhog's Day. Every single day is the same. It rains or it doesn't rain. Maybe, a family member has a child, so that's a big event. But at the end of the day, everybody gets up every single day and they go to the fields and they work the fields. There's no TV, there's no going into the city and whatever, having dinner at a restaurant. There's no books, I mean, that was the thing I realized. And so even the fact that a person who's known and trusted in their community comes to a farmer and says, hey, I'm here to help. This is this new program and the intention is that this thing is going to be here for good. And I've got this tool and, let's give it a try. I feel like, to me, that was the biggest thing, was that everybody, of course, I'm probably going to show because I was there, but everybody seemed to really respect Simon and trust him. They were happy to spend time sitting and chatting with him. They had questions for him. They were happy to answer his survey questions. Life moves pretty slowly in a lot of these places, and they work in the field all day, but then they go take a rest under the tree because it's hot, and Simon comes up and says, do you have a few minutes for a survey? And so it's just really interesting to kind of watch that. And so there are a lot of things we don't know yet. There's still so many things that we're trying to hone about the model, whether it be how to, improve the CKW performance or how to, improve farmers' willingness to try these recommendations or the business model or whatever. But, we feel like we're on a good path and we're learning a lot. And so that's kind of where we're at. Yeah. Anyway, before we go on to some just high-level observations and trends that I had kind of from my work, I want to maybe open up to questions about the CKW model.
You mentioned mobile money. Could you read more about it? How that was?
Sure. So I'm not a techie myself, but I'll tell you sort of just at a high level. Sure.
Technical aspect of the distributional aspect. Are these exchange economies more part of it?
Good question. I think they are in a lot of ways barter economies, but People are obviously looking to sell things for cash to some degree. Problem is, for a lot of these people, cash is not safe. In a lot of these places, people have just recently come back from being in these IDP camps and having been terrorized by the Wharton's army and all that. There are still some, marauding gang members that go around and steal anything they can find. So cash isn't really safe. Mobile money is actually something that hasn't had a lot of uptake yet, partly because it is hard for a person to get to a cash out point agent. And so that's a big piece that,
These guys, do they carry cash?
Nope, they don't at this point, and that's the thing. So we pay these guys using mobile money, but then if they want to go cash out and use that cash for something, they have to go to the city, right? And a CKW, because they're earning approximately $1 a day incremental income, so to them it almost doubles their income, they might decide that that makes sense for them, or they need to go because they're trying to pay their child's school fees using that cash. But over time, what we're actually thinking about is, would it make sense for these guys at a very, very agents themselves, and what would be required to sort of make that work logistically? That's always the biggest challenge, and security-wise, what would you need to make it secure for these people?
So the other question, you mentioned 400 or 500 people in the Delta certified. How many of those people have phone?
Good question. I'm trying to remember now from earlier studies we did. I believe in the pilot, in two of the districts that we were working in, we kind of did some research to find out how many people at least had easy access to a phone. We found that about 40% of the farmers had access to a phone. But that was sort of, through a neighbor or somebody else. It didn't mean that many owners had their own. Yeah. And they tend to be very, very simple phones. And so one of the things that I mentioned is, right now we're doing all these things through the smartphone with the CKW, but we're also looking at what are the other channels of distribution for information that could reinforce and increase the likelihood of adoption. And so we're going to be starting a pilot with the Farmer Voice Radio. It's different than Farm Radio International. So Farmer Voice Radio folks, to do some collaborative work with them, so utilizing radio messaging, and then also have built a small call center that we're trying to raise additional funds to build out. But the call center would have, or has some agriculture experts in-house that help us with our content, but they're also on call for when people dial in, and they also serve as kind of a reinforcement to say, oh, and by the way, you should go talk to your CKW, because they can also help you with this. So if a person just happens to have picked up the phone and called because they had access to this hotline, great, but we want there to sort of be these mutually reinforcing channels, all using the same database of content. So that's kind of how I
have some more questions, kind of more about the process. When you say you sign up a farmer, what does that mean? So you give them some sort of unique ID. What do they have to do to sign up?
So when the process is when we go out to a new kind of region, we spend usually a couple of months in advance working with the partner organization to build out the plan. So how are we going to go do this together?
Right.
And we make sure that we've got them sort of committing some resources, not just dollars, but people from their side, because it's, at the end of the day, it's their intervention in that district, and we really want to help them be more successful. So, we kind of figure out where are we going to operate, who are the people of influence that we need to go and talk to before we even show up there to make sure that they feel comfortable with what we're hoping to do. So sensitization in the community. All of our staff, by the way, is local, is Ugandan. So not all of our staff, but all the staff that's involved in the field operations. We've got 2 expats in the field. And so they go out and they sit down and they work with the local folks to say, here's the program, here's what it looks like, here's how we want to work with you, here's the benefits that we think will bring to your community. We'd like your permission to recruit from the farmer groups here. And so then they literally will go to the farmer groups, call a meeting or show up at a regularly scheduled meeting and introduce the program and say, this is what it's about, here's the objective, we're really trying to help you with your, provide farming information that you need. We would like to have you nominate from within this group 3 candidates who will serve in this role. Here's the criteria we're looking for, and please do this. And so we work with the local folks to get these candidates, and then we go and have the community vote on it. There was a good question earlier about how do you avoid problems where maybe one person or group of CKW, maybe he or she doesn't like a certain family, or you hope you get around that by having this voting process and this vetting process. But at the end of the day, if that one family is not represented in the voting process because they were busy and they couldn't come to the meeting or whatever, how do you get around that? I don't know.
Right. Well, I guess I understand that part, but I guess what I don't understand is, okay, so you sign up this farmer. What does that mean? Now the farmer is the
CKW or the farmer?
I'm talking about the farmer.
Yeah.
What happens now? Now does the community knowledge worker is required to go to that farmer, you know, once a month and chat with them, or, so that's one question.
Sure.
Another, and like, how do you know it's, I mean, what are you doing to, like, as a unique identifier that we're talking about to know that that farm is registered? Then, as far as the community knowledge worker is concerned, like, how are they getting information? Is information being pumped through their phone to them saying, hey, here's a news alert about, or, you know, hey, can you tell me price information? Or like what's the actual process?
Sure. So with a new farmer that a CKW registers, they literally have these cards right now that have, you know, a little logo on it and a number. And that's that farmer's number. And once they register that farmer, they go through and ask a number of questions, kind of like an intake survey.
Okay.
They want to understand, you know, basic demographics. They do a PPI survey, the Progress Out of Poverty Index, to understand their approximate level of, you know, income. They ask them about the crops they grow, you know, approximate acreage, some basic stuff so that we kind of understand what's going on. And then that unique ID goes into the system. Now, as far as incentives for the CKWs, we're starting basic. Let's just say, okay, we need you to at least register X number of farmers per month as a first sort of performance indicator. Second, we need you to have X% repeat visits. And third, we need you to, third, we need to have you disseminate a certain amount of information in terms of number of tips/visits. You know, sort of a tip can include multiple pieces of information about the same topic. And then fourth, you have a certain number of surveys you have to conduct. And we have an application we've developed called Pulse. It's just a simple little communication tool that goes out each month to every CKW and says, here's what your targets are for this month, and that's based on various different factors and prioritizing the needs from different partners or surveys that we want to do. And we try to minimize the overload on the farmers and the CKWs, so we kind of ration the survey amounts. And we say, here's what your goal is, and if you achieve this on these different metrics, you'll get, you know, this much payment. If you achieve this, you'll get this much. And over time, you know, we very closely monitor performance. And if CKWs aren't performing, like I think mentioned earlier, we'll have the field officer go out and have a visit and try to understand, like, are you sick, or your child is sick, or what's the issue? You know, if over time we see that the CKW is just not performing, or if we talk to other farmers in the area and they're like, hey, this guy's just not doing his job, then we actually will replace them. And we'll, you know, give them lots of opportunities to improve their performance. But if it doesn't work, we have to take the phone back and we recruit another CKW. That's costly, right? But at the end of the day, you really do need that performance.
And I'm sorry, just one follow-up.
Claire, she's got to get to her last two slides.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, well, there was one other question that was important, but I can't remember what the other question was. I think it was relevant.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So I was just going to actually talk about kind of some trends I see in ICT for development, but maybe I can ask if there are anybody else that have questions on this model first, and then
Claire.
okay.
You said that the Google SMS method failed because of stagnation of information, but you're saying that this model is working. Why is this model working as opposed to that model?
I think it's the human aspect. So that was what your question was like, now, so we have this content in the system. We're not, at this point, we're not pushing out curriculum. I mean, there is curriculum that, say, EABD, the dairy program, has in their system. They want dairy farmers to learn about these different things. But we're not forcing the CKWs to go and push a curriculum. It's all meant to be demand-driven at this point, where if a farmer has a particular need, we want that information to be available. We want it to be relevant, localized, timely, etc. In the system. But the difference is before, it was up to a farmer to even know that that system existed. If they didn't own their own phone, to go find someone else who had a phone and be like, oh yeah, there's that database thing, that 6001 thing. And if I text it, there will be some information about, oh, maybe I'm not literate, so I mean, why would I? We didn't have a voice thing at the time. And so really, I think the reason this is different is because you've got that local person in the village who's known, trusted, incented to go and visit these farmers on a regular basis. And it becomes part of their kind of everyday, you know, they get up, they do their own work in their fields, whatever, then they go and spend 2 or 3 hours walking around, meeting other farmers, trying to fulfill their quota. They go back into their fields some more. Maybe at dinner, you know, they stumble upon another farmer who has a question. So it's meant to be more of a sort of, rather than asking them to radically change how they seek information.
So you're saying that since it's all up to the CKW and this new model of how the CKW goes out and does things, so you're saying whether it's a smartphone or non-smartphone, it would still work?
I think in theory it could. I mean, the thing that's good about a non-smartphone is that you know, the cost of the program would be lower. That's not our biggest cost.
There's two things. There's cost for the phone itself, because smartphones are not only just costlier, they're also a lot more difficult to handle and use.
But if you design the applications in such a way where you've got pictures and very simple, menu-based or tree-based systems, and if you test them very, very thoroughly with users who are your target users, I think you can overcome some of those things. But I hear you. I mean, the handset is a decently big line item in our budget. But as long as the business-to-business side of the operation is successful in terms of bringing these partners in who are willing to sort of pay a piece of the cost of operating this whole model, then the cost of the handset becomes something that is actually worthwhile paying for, because those partners actually value the data that can only come from a smartphone at this point, the location piece. So it's kind of a trade-off. If you found that people weren't willing to pay for the data, then maybe you go to a simple phone model. But at the end of the day, the phone's not the most expensive part of the program, it's the people.
The data is being pushed through the phone to
well, it's GPRS. At this point, there's not really Wi-Fi or anything out there, but they're Android, so you could use it for that.
GPRS in terms of availability and cost.
Go ahead, sorry.
And what's the dependency level on this data? As in, everyone going through the smartphone, from the registration ID to the actual information submission, everything is dependent on the data.
Yep.
Due to a point.
It is, yeah, and I mean, obviously, our field officers go out and they, meet with CKWs every week, and they're writing reports too. But in reality, the day-to-day data is really, and the content is really fun. So in terms of sort of reliability and how much dependency we have on it, big dependency. The way that we develop the applications, they work offline. We learned that pretty early, that we had to be able to make them work in offline mode, and then as soon as there was a signal, they could sort of send and receive. And so that's been a big thing. And then, how do you make certain things work in the background? How do you make GPS work in the background? Or how do you think about customizing the OS such that it turns off certain functions that drain the battery too quickly? Or how do you, can you get a GPS sort of trace or whatever, and then have it turn off after that? So that's partly why we went with Android, is that we really wanted to have the ability to customize all of the aspects to battery life. Being told I'm short on time. How short?
Sure, but I want you to get your trends.
Oh, thanks. Sure.
And then maybe we can take questions offline.
Okay, so these are just some off the top of my head observations. One of the things that I am seeing more and more, I just sort of touched on some random little icons, I'm seeing more and more that people are looking at how do you really improve entire value chains. And so when you think about what that means, it's not just a piece of a solution to solve just the farmer information bit. But when we think about, not only the market prices, but how do people find out about transportation to get their stuff to market? What about certification information? How do we integrate with, the coffee, purchasers or the co-ops here or there? So I think there's an increasing recognition that these problems are, and these needs are sort of interlinked. And I think people are increasingly looking at entire value chains. And to one of the points I'll get to on the next page, there's also, I think because of that, an increasing need for and role for public-private partnerships, because you tend to find these agriculture sector, processors or whatever, who are for-profit, but they actually want, a lot of them want the farmers to, make a good living, because they want to be able to have these sort of sustained sources of healthy crops. And so, there's a need, I think, and an opportunity for public and private to work together. Also, seeing more, breaking down of silos. We're trying to do that within our own organization to say, what role can our financial services for the core team play in helping us think about integrated solutions across health or ag? What role could ag and health people play in designing a nutrition-oriented solution? And so trying to sort of break down the barriers, and sometimes that happens at the level of just the content that you provide. Sometimes it's at the level of the incentives. There's all kinds of implications for that. Obviously, the more you try to design holistic solutions, the more complicated it gets, and the more people that are involved. So you always have to sort of weigh the trade-offs between making it holistic and all-inclusive and complex, or having something that's small and sort of confined and easy to put a box around, because there's room for both at different stages of the life cycle of a problem solution. What was this? Oh yeah, more and more people are asking for measurable results for good reason. I talked a little earlier about the difficulties of that, and sort of what do you measure? adoption is the thing that people are looking at a lot in agriculture, adoption of improved agricultural techniques, but that's not going to capture everything. That's going to tell you how effective you were in convincing a farmer that they should listen to some information and maybe make a different decision, but it's not really going to tell you how to influence that farmer's life. That's the hard part. So, we're trying a lot of different things. We're trying to raise money to get a firm to come in and do an RCT. It's been surprisingly difficult to actually do that, because what we found is that researchers have interesting sort of goals and objectives around what they want to publish on that is oftentimes not always congruous with just answering the basic question of how are we achieving these certain goals. So it's a sort of an interesting question, but you have to make it interesting for researchers too. And then let's see, like I said, blurring the lines between public and private. So, there's for-profit companies. I talked about processors in the ag sector. There's telcos, there's health franchises, people that are basically just doing business at the bottom of the pyramid. But, I used this example earlier in a discussion about Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is this company that's learned sort of from experience that you're not going to be profitable trying to grow into this worldwide conglomerate if you don't deeply understand and respect what you're trying to sell to. And in fact, they're an important part of your distribution network and your marketing and everything. And so I think there is an increasing role for private sector to play, and a need to sort of having good dialogue and relationship between those things. Talk about franchises. A lot of these franchises, pretty interesting stuff. And Rumah is a franchise that we incubated in Indonesia that's doing, started out as a village phone operator type business, and then we started selling airtime and providing other services through the phone. But technology can really help improve the efficiency of these organizations and help them track who they're reaching, and help with inventory and payments and all kinds of other stuff. So there are interesting opportunities to use telecommunications or ICT in this context. And then this is sort of an interesting thing I'm seeing. Doesn't really quite go under this heading, I guess, but donors are wanting to see governments show not only more capability but commitment to change before they'll fund these big overhauls. So there's a big, huge World Bank funded program that's meant to support the Ugandan Agriculture Ministry in doing this complete overhaul, and a big component around ICT. And at the end of the day, there was a year of talking about what they were going to do, but nothing really happened. And so the funding got put on hold, and they're like, show us that you guys are serious. Show us that you can work out your internal politics. Show us what you're going to do to improve your transparency and all of the sort of relationships that you're going to put in place to sort of make this viable, and then we'll release the money. And I think that's probably going to be an increasing trend for, it's a good thing. And lastly, GSMA, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's the trade association that sort of supports the GSM mobile operators around the world, and they have this GSMA development fund and a number of sub-initiatives focused on agriculture or women or health or things like that. And they're putting money out there for these initiatives, but they're basically asking the NGOs who are developing the proposals to say, how have you gotten the commitment from your telco partner? And what's the exit strategy? And what's this going to look like in 5 years? And is that telco going to carry this forward? So there's increasing sort of expectation that public-private are working closely together. Data is king, as I said. You've got to have a data strategy if you're an organization that's doing work in this space. We're just starting to get our brain around what that means as an organization. We're just starting to think about, do we need to build some common architecture or some common, API layer or something? I'm not a techie, but trying to think about what does that mean. We're collecting lots and lots of data that we're using in our individual initiatives, but is there an opportunity to look across initiatives and learn a ton about ways to improve our interventions? And what does that mean for donors and others? And so I think organizations increasingly need that. So as you're thinking about skills to build and things like that, deep data analytics is always a good thing to have. So my piece on that if you're a learner. I think that's all. So,
Whoa. We are at the end, so let's take a few questions because then Heather wants to go rock climbing. Heather actually